In the mid-1990s, home consoles were on the verge of a 3D era, and the platforming game was at its peak. Mario and Sonic had cemented themselves as kings of their respective systems, for their bold aesthetics, rewarding level design, and, of course, their promotional power. Both characters would eventually make their debuts in 3D, generations apart, and Nintendo's first foray in particular would set the benchmark for games going forward. However, with the release of the PlayStation, a new face would go to represent the console in its formative years, and give gamers not only their introduction to the system, but 3D games in general. Titles like Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, Tekken, Gran Turismo, Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy VII would define the system's legacy. But, if you were to ask the majority of people who they would most associate with the console in its early days, it would be an Australian marsupial with an appetite for destruction. Designed and developed by Naughty Dog, a developer who would build on foundations of straight-ahead action games with the Uncharted series and The Last of Us, the original Crash Bandicoot series stands as a golden example of the platform game's transition into the third dimension. With a remaster of the Trilogy set to release in 2017, the question is whether the series still retains engaging mechanical design beyond the nostalgia for the early days of the PlayStation brand, and outside of its strong aesthetic design, whether any lessons learned from its mechanical design could be applied to future titles. I'm James D, and I'm going to explain why Crash works. Boiled down to their essence, every platform game is about pushing forward, whether it's through World 1-1, the Green Hill Zone, Cutman Stage, an apocalyptic future, the moon, Dracula's castle, a raging firefight or countless other environments. All games encourage players to keep progressive momentum, while avoiding obstacles, collecting treasures, navigating platforms and meeting objectives. Objectives in particular are what separates Mario's time obstacle courses from Sonic's mastery of inertia. Crash takes elements of both titles, but presents its own unique conditions between levels to satisfy players' curiosity and need for command. Each Crash game is about completing a set of levels, usually bookended by boss fights, in order to complete the game. Levels are naturally set up in a way to lead players towards the goal, be it with lines of fruit or boxes in the distance, population of enemy characters, or the threat of immovable obstacles behind the player. Each level is its own microcosm of challenges, all following a small set of conditions, each with its own level of necessity to complete in the game. In the original, players only need reach the end of a level to proceed directly to the next, and from the second onwards, players are also required to collect crystals, usually found on the direct path, and used as currency for unlocking later sets of levels. For players looking for an additional challenge, gems are an incentive for meeting additional conditions, be it destroying all level crates, progressing on a single life to access bonus routes, not to mention a number of other unique circumstances. In the third and final game, time trials are added to previously completed levels, a mutation that challenges players to have complete mastery of the game in order to achieve relics of 3 distinct grades. This is a challenge designed for players looking to squeeze the most out of the title, and provide the most distilled experience of the game's tenets. Using the structure between levels means that players always know what they should be achieving, and gives them incentive to take on harder objectives in order to fully complete the game. This focus on a small number of core features with a breadth of outfits also extends to Crash's list of moves, solutions to the game's multitude of challenges. For all 3 games, Crash's move list has stayed relatively small, and each is a solution that every single one of the game's challenges can be built around. Players move Crash with either the directional pad or analog stick, moving the character freely along a flat plane in a 3D space. Pressing the X button allows him to jump, square makes him spin, his main offensive move and the series' trademark ability, and from the second game onwards, the circle or R1 button modifies all moves in the game. The standstill, Crash crouches, pushing any direction causes him to crawl, allowing passage onto small spaces at the expense of speed. Pressing X triggers a high jump, which provides additional height at the expense of mobility. Mid-jump, it causes him to perform a belly flop, a move that disrupts the push-forward design of the title, and primarily used to destroy crates designed to justify the move. While moving, it allows Crash to perform a slide, an additional boost to speed at the expense of control. These moves can be chained together to perform more complex moves, and their input distance on a PS1 controller allow a player to do so with ease, with the thumb resting on the X and square and the index on R1 at all times. This simple formula allows developers to create multiple problems by mixing and matching solutions. Obstacles can be separated into jumping, spinning, or sliding solutions, and then additionally modified, such as moving targets, timed targets, targets that can react and attack, or cannot be engaged with directly. By doing this, players aren't expected to relearn controls for single-purpose gimmicks, or controls to be spread across the controller in multiple configurations. The game keeps input simple, so it can compensate with a breadth of challenge design. It keeps things easy to communicate without making things too easy, and ultimately gets all players up to the same level of confidence. Later games would challenge these controls by changing both their context or subtly mutate them. Take for example the animal riding and vehicle levels. Inputs are either restricted or amplified to create challenge. In the case of the animals, forward momentum is taken out of the player's control, as is any offensive ability, making it more about avoiding obstacles and hitting objectives in auto-running sections. These levels at least feel coherent to the experience and don't require the player to relearn the mapping of the controller. However, motorbike and jetpack levels changed the controls to such a degree that, arguably, they didn't reflect the core experience of the Crash games. But being so few and far between, they do show the creative thinking of level designers who want to better contextualize level ideas. In the third game, special abilities are added, 3 of which are modifications on core abilities: a double jump, super spin and super belly flop, a run button for players who want to control their own difficulty for the opportunity to fully feel ownership over the title, and finally a bazooka. A funny addition, but one that defies the push forward nature of the game and does little to justify its inclusion. I would be remiss not to mention Crash's core power up, a piece of armour that gives Crash an additional hit point. It's a footnote because it's designed to allow players a crutch on certain obstacles, but was never designed as the intended solution to any of the game's challenges. However, it still incentivizes players to be at their best, as collecting 3 allows players to become temporarily invincible to nearly all challenges, allowing some much needed catharsis. Both a simple recipe for objective and solution design, designers are allowed a wide scope to begin crafting interesting level and environment designs to challenge the player. However, there's one more key ingredient the entire game hinges on: its camera. Every in-game camera is the user's window to the world, and how information is shown or not shown affects not only the player's problem solving, but the entire look, feel, or even genre of the title. Whether it's the top-down view of a battlefield in a real-time strategy game, the profile view of both combatants in a fighting game, or even the dashboard mounting of a camera in a driving game. At the release of early 3D platform games, camera design moved more to the forefront of development and had a greater effect on the style of game design that followed. Super Mario 64 in particular was perhaps one of the pioneers of giving players control of in-game camera, and in turn changed the notion of the classic platformer by opening up worlds into larger play areas and scavenger hunt design, where players could direct themselves and choose their own method of progression, a system that has influenced games ever since. Crash, on the other hand, keeps the camera directly in the control of the designer, and much like Resident Evil or Metal Gear Solid, can be used to bound player information, and in conjunction with tailored level design direct players down a certain path or elicit a certain emotion. Take for example Crash's classic boulder chase levels. If the camera was set up to follow the path from the side or behind the character's back, level design would still function, though not with its intended level of challenge. The same would be said if the camera was in the player's direct control. However, when placed directly in front of Crash, players are challenged both to think ahead of obstacles and still meet objectives, but also to remain one step ahead of the rolling rock. Crash's best levels challenge static camera placement and make it part of the design, and in conjunction with strong objective and solution design, come together to support a game bursting with creativity, both aesthetically and mechanically. It's obvious that a lot of Crash's approach to mechanical design is influenced by its aesthetic design. Its Looney Tunes take on environment and character design, its Chuck Jones inspired animation, its upbeat and off-kilter soundtrack, and even its tongue-in-cheek approach to narrative, all fit its forward movement design sensibility, and even as an early generation 3D title, it still holds up due to its strong aesthetics. The number of environments that move from tropical jungles and laboratories all the way to tundras, ancient Egypt, a fantastical Middle Ages and a high-tech future are also all to be commended, especially when they provide unique dress into the game's obstacles. On a short note, I also wanted to make a point of Crash's use of crates. Much like Mario has blocks, the crates in Crash have a wide versatility. On a base level, interacting them is incredibly satisfying. Spinning or jumping into them causes an eruption of debris and a crunchy sound effect, usually followed by a glomp of fruit and, if you're lucky, the ring of an extra life. Boxes aren't just used to lead a player and add towards their own tally, but they can be used to create temporary platforms and even hazards in the stage, opening up far more opportunities to challenge the player. The sheer variety of box types keeps the game from feeling stale and quickly creates a sandwich between the game and the player. Though its vision remains strong, Return to the Trilogy does expose the limitations of the early days of 3D games. Controls can oftentimes be stiff, challenges and objectives poorly communicated and unforgiving, and its fidelity compared to modern titles are a contested topic. In particular, the merits of a lockdown camera is an argued topic, with some players seeing it as a reluctance to give players authorship over their games. However, by doing so, Crash Bandicoot games can be as tight as possible without a need to add unnecessary bulk. All in all, the sheer amount of ideas between levels and how effortlessly they're executed thanks to the lockdown design of the objectives, solutions and camera design prove that good game design stands the test of time. In regard to this point, the question now is whether newer games can learn a thing from Crash, and whether the series deserves another chance on the tail end of a remaster. Since the completion of the original trilogy, the PlayStation saw Crash in a spin-off racing and party game, before moving on to other developers and a new generation of systems. Crash hasn't seen a new game for a number of years now, and the last period of titles had moved away from the linear, forward movement design of the original trilogy, and instead shifted more towards a mix of open arena style environments with simple platforming challenges and less of a focus on testing Crash's core abilities. However, certain developers did pick up the torch of this focused approach to tailored level design, and the best examples of them were helmed by the developer responsible for rewriting the rules of 3D platformers. Following on from 64 and Sunshine, the Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario 3D titles split the difference between the simplicity of the original 2D platformers and the scope of the 3D games, in turn creating experiences that hold Mario's breadth of abilities down to their essentials and instead focused on creating unique obstacle courses to surprise and challenge players at every level. Starting in Galaxy, and from 3D Land onwards, the camera was even reverted back to the developers to tailor unique level challenges. From top-down views to move players down vertical shafts, side-on angles that follow Mario around obtuse platforms, and wide angles to show the breadth of open environments. Even extra objectives became an additional incentive for players. Cosmic coins and medals allowing players to revisit levels with new conditions, some of which feel analogous to Crash. From time attacks, Daredevil single health runs, and 100 coin challenges that call back to relic runs, no death fruits and box gems. This isn't to mention new twists to the formula, in the form of cosmic copycats, more aggressive and double quick challenges, enemy extermination challenges, and even hidden stars in some levels. Should the developers of the next Crash Bandicoot look to any title for inspiration, it should be these later 3D Mario titles. Both franchises have a focus on giving player expression through mastery of simple to pick up controls in challenging environments, leading them by focused camera placement and level design, and encouraging replayability through new objectives. With a focus on these core mechanics and objectives, the design should feel free to open up levels to any idea they see fit, be it paths that defy gravity up sheer faces and across ceilings, paths that change depending on the player's input or interaction with a level, levels that force players to use their abilities in unique situations, or even challenge them to avoid using them altogether. Aesthetically, level settings should continue down the path of abstraction, where any and every environment idea can be contextualized into a level and repurposed into Crash's art style, with a return to memorable locations and ideas. Graphics and sound are very much a matter of taste, but anything that strives towards better recreating the look of the original would give the game the iconic look that all established franchises should achieve. Finally, if not an outright reduction of vehicle gimmicks, find ways of recontextualizing the moveset in new ways without completely changing their core inputs, and still maintain the limited number of inputs to retain input speed. In conclusion, there's much more to the Crash Bandicoot series than just its allegiance to the early days of the PlayStation brand. With a strong mechanical core bolstered by creative level design and bold aesthetics, the game remains not only one of the platformer's finest outings, but still holds up many years later. The opportunity for developers to reintroduce Crash is also justifiable, and the work done by the new 3D Mario titles provides the perfect template for how a Crash Bandicoot title could play going forward, harkening back to its established gameplay design while blowing open the possibilities of inventive level design. In today's market of open adventure titles and blended genres, Crash's take on forward-moving and soft objective platforming is much more of a novelty than it was back in the mid-90s, not to mention a refuge for those looking for more simple to pick up and play experiences. With the success of retro revivals of previously forgotten platforming genres, not to mention the remaster on the way, perhaps the time is right for a return for the much loved marsupial, and this time not just as a Toys to Life tag along.